The advent of the summer solstice and its accompanying celebrations bring about the happiest day of Feyre's life. The juxtaposition of needless violence and Rhysand's terrifying visit heralds unwelcome change for Feyre and separates her from Tamlin. As she is forced to return to the human world, is Feyre still the woman she once was, and will she be able to assimilate when she returns to her family?
The views expressed by the hosts are entirely their own and in no way represent the thoughts or intentions of the original author. This podcast is a discussion shared to spark thought and conversation on the characters and themes of this novel.
Though the hosts speak mostly within the constraints of this book, series spoilers may be discussed with or without warning.
Explicit language as well as themes of sex, violence, abuse, and depression will reoccur throughout the podcast. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Book Talk for Book Talk, a podcast where we deep dive into the writing of your favorite novels.
This season, we are exploring Sarah J. Maas's most controversial novel in A Court of Thorns and Roses series. This is Jac.
And I'm Amy, and this week we're discussing chapters 23 through 28 in A Court of Thorns and Roses.
There are several questions that we ask ourselves. How much information is Feyre given, and how much is she actually processing?
Also, during the times Feyre is most unlike herself, has she grown or become other? Themes we see this week include sight and perception, what you see versus what you choose or are allowed to see.
We will tell you what you're allowed to see now, and that is our interpretation.
Only our interpretation.
And that is our smooth transition. We start in chapter 23, and at the beginning of this, Tamlin brings Feyre to another beautiful spot in the forest, and Feyre goes in with the belief that the enchantments are gone. Page 208. But there were no enchantments here. But by the end of the day, Feyre realizes that Tamlin was enchanting her the entire time. So starts the day saying, yay, finally, a day where I don't get tricked. And then she realizes her entire time there has been one big trick. But at the end of the day, this is supposed to be considered a gift of sorts. And rather than getting angry, like Feyre used to get angry when Tamlin would pull this type of shit, Feyre is grateful for being given the sight.
I think that this is really a recurring theme in their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
As we're going to see as we go throughout this episode, I think her lack of anger just shows her complacency. And that's going to be a theme that we see here too.
I miss angry Feyre.
I miss angry Feyre. I look forward to meeting her again.
You and I were just saying that before we set up I miss angry Feyre who was convinced she was going to die all the time. She was great.
Bring her back.
I love her sass.
I would like to say that she's probably got no sass because she's been seduced by all this color and sound that's always intensified when she's around Tamlin. And before he lifts the veil from her eyes, she describes the grass as an emerald carpet. So you know that she's like in her element here.
I love that she's like an emerald carpet. I can see it, but also never in a million years would I ever describe something like that.
No, I hate grass. It would never be.
You really do hate grass.
I hate grass. It would never be a carpet.
You would hate the spring court.
Yes, I would. I would have allergies nonstop. When he does lift the glamour from her and she's able to see the world the way Tamlin sees it, Sarah J. Maas makes sure that we have a compare and contrast. So the birds chattered becomes the singing of birds became an orchestra, a symphony of gossip and mirth. And then the willow branches sighed becomes an ethereal melody, a woman, melancholy and weary. The willow.
So intense.
Even Tamlin looks different to Feyre, and he only lets her see this for a moment so that she longs for more. He just gives her a little taste. Feyre thinks, I looked to Tamlin and my heart cracked entirely. It was the Tamlin I dreamed of. This was a High Lord of Prythian, devastatingly handsome, captivating, powerful beyond belief. When I reread that, I was like, okay, Megan Fox.
And then they drank each other's blood.
Right. He's kinetic.
What was it? Rehab Barbie?
Rehab Barbie. Yeah, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go find Megan Fox's poem that she wrote about Machine Gun Kelly, and you will know.
Pure art.
Pure art. And that is what Feyre was creating when she described Tamlin. What I am kind of infuriated by is the fact that she's so focused on his outward appearance in this moment that she ignores the other warning signs about his character.
Yeah.
She even thinks, I don't know why the mask bothered me so greatly. I didn't need to see his entire face to know him. While that's true, she still refuses to actually see who he is. based on his actions so far.
You make a point, I might be spoiling it for later, but you make a point where the mask eventually begins to represent his weakness.
Yeah.
And you talk about it more later, but it is a great thing to notice how she perceives that mask throughout the entire time he has it. In the beginning, he's this like dark, foreboding person, and it's just like, oh, he probably just wearing it for like because it's weird fashion because he's fairy and fairies suck.
Yes.
And now it's just like so dreamy.
And at some point in the middle, it's like it adds to his allure because he's mysterious and she like to imagine what he looks like under it. But now it's just like frustrating to her.
I'm just imagining like it's kind of like people dating during the pandemic. You don't know what they look like underneath their face mask.
It's true.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So many of my student workers, I see them with face masks all the time. And then the one time I see them without the face mask, I'm like, oh, that's not what I thought you looked like.
That's what Feyre's experiencing.
Yeah, exactly.
So when Tamlin gives her this knowledge, he is bequeathing her this new information, this new way of seeing the world. You can really look at their dynamic as a human and fae, the fact that they're kind of flirting around the lines of a relationship. It has that inherently forbidden aspect about it. Granted, faes and human have been hooking up forever, I'm sure. But the power dynamic, the forbidden aspect of it, the fact that Tamlin said he would never be with a human forever ago, those add the forbidden element. So by kissing her, lightly, he's offering her the forbidden fruit of knowledge and being able to see the world. And this really goes back to an Adam and Eve type of description. It ultimately marks the demise of Eve and of Feyre. It's, he is a snake, a slippery snake.
I was about to say, he's not God in this situation. He's Satan.
He's snake.
He's the one tempting her to take the fruit. And just like Satan manipulated Eve, Tamlin is manipulating Feyre by bargaining with her to his advantage so that he can get what he wants, so that she can get something she didn't even know she lacked. He's a predator.
If I was Sarah J. Maas, I would have included them eating like a pomegranate or something.
She lost an opportunity there. But Tamlin plays this off. He says, every gift comes with a price. I'm one of the High Fae. We don't give anything without gaining something from it, which we know is like typical for fairy lore.
He knows what he's doing.
Oh, he knows what he's doing.
It's like, let's romanticize withholding and payment.
Quid pro quo.
That is the foundation for every relationship.
And sexual harassment claims. So moving into chapter 24, this idea or this theme of the ability to see or not see continues, and it separates Feyre from the Fae. Tamlin obviously believes it's in her best interest to continue to put glamours on her or to have previously put glamours on her because it keeps her safe. This obviously isn't really what she wants.
I love this point because seeing is such an important theme, not just for these chapters, but for the entire book, but particularly these chapters. For Feyre, seeing is important because she literally cannot see their faces. So she can't see the lies that they're providing her. They can't see the lack of truth. She can't see Amarantha. She can't see what's actually going on. Like, her world is so limited to this little tiny house. I mean, it's not a house, it's a big house, but her world is limited to this one court, to this one house. She can't see anything. So by being able to finally see what's around her and what that has, the implications are huge.
But she rationalizes this decision that Tamlin's made for her without consulting her. And I find that really infuriating. And I think Feyre of chapter 1 would have found that really infuriating.
Yes.
She thinks to herself, a glamour. That's what Tamlin had said he wore. His fairy sight had stripped away the glamours I'd been seeing. But why bother to glamour everything? Because I'd been a cowering human, that's why. So she thinks this when she realizes that there's a ton of fairies in the spring court that she has never seen before, and when she sees Alice's true form for the first time. And instead of being mad that she's now seeing everyone for the first time, she thinks of herself as a cowardly human. And I think that's brainwashing at its finest.
It's so sad, though, that she thinks it's because I'm a coward. No, they did it because they're trying to hide from you what's going on. And I think Tamlin makes a point later saying, like, it was for your benefit. It's like, no, it was so that she didn't know there was a bunch of people around when she was trying to sneak out.
Exactly. When she finds out that she had an audience when she goes after the puka way back when, she thinks, I thought I'd been so stealthy. Meanwhile, I'd been tiptoeing past fairies who had probably laughed their heads off at the blind human following an illusion.
And this is a moment when we're supposed to laugh, Or at least that's a moment where everyone around her laughs. Whether we're supposed to laugh, I don't know. I didn't laugh when I read that because they're, again, denying her information and then they're laughing at her for that, just as they deny her information and they get mad at her. She cannot win. And with Tamlin, she's being measured by a standard that she'll always fail. And Tamlin, in that regard, is just like Amarantha, where Amarantha will measure Feyre by rules that even if Feyre wins, she cannot win.
And Feyre just goes along with it. I think she's given up so much control at this point that she says, I see, I lied, not quite seeing it all. And this line has always stuck out to me every time I read this book, because just like with what you were saying about Tamlin and his standards, she could say, okay, yeah, I get it, but not really. She doesn't really get it.
Has Feyre really lied about her lack of understanding for things outwardly? I think she stayed quiet.
She's always gone to someone looking for information.
That line is very poignant. I see, I lied.
Yeah.
Not quite seen.
I think this is probably one of the first times that she's just been like me, when someone says something and I can't hear them, I'll just nod my head and smile. Like, oh, okay.
Or someone makes a joke and I don't get it. I'm like, huh.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what's happening here.
Yep.
I think she's starting to realize more and more that there's so much she doesn't know, but she's not willing to fight for that information anymore.
She is no longer the Feyre at the beginning of the book who wants that information. And there is a choice, just like she says very clearly, that she's chosen not to look for any hint of the human slaves that previously lived there. There's a certain amount of lack of ownership that we're starting to see in her. And early Feyre, I think if she felt more empowered to walk around and spy, because I think early Feyre was like too busy thinking they're going to kill her any second. If she knew she was safe, I think she would have gone around to explore any human remains there. This current Feyre, she's choosing not to go forward.
This reminds me of something you said in our last episode, that she lacks ownership, just like Tamlin doesn't take accountability for anything, right?
Yeah.
He always blames someone else. And she is becoming him, and we're seeing that in so many different ways. It's gotten to the point that she doesn't even bother to offer to help Tamlin anymore because she knows he will turn her down. She has become complacent because of him.
It makes me so mad because he's taken away her fight for knowledge, her fight to want to help. And that fight is who she is. And he's torn that apart bit by bit by denying her all the time. Even when he explains that he's trying to protect her, she does mental gymnastics in order to make sense of his lies. Feyre says, this was for my own safety, not his amusement. He didn't want to hurt me. He didn't want to punish them for hurting me. Even the Naga hadn't been part of his court. Had it hurt him to kill them? No, like literally it hurt him because he's weak. When I first read that in the book, my first thought was, oh, like, he's saying those words like, oh, I can't go and hunt these fairies all the time. I read it as, because he's weak and he knows he's weak and he's becoming weaker by the day.
Yeah, instead she's projecting her ability to be compassionate onto him.
It's like, honey, no, it's not about that.
He is not you.
You are him.
Yeah. Feyre is starting to recognize that Tamlin is weak. This is after they find the decapitated head in the garden. He says, don't worry, Feyre, you're still safe here. It's the first time she voices to herself his weakness and that his mask is representative of his weakness. The particular line on page 218 is, I didn't have the heart to say that their masks made it fairly clear that nothing could be done against the blight.
In that same scene, she calls it out like, damn, he's not that strong. Feyre decides to stay because, first, as if she has a choice, but second, because she leans back to what the serial said. She uses his words about staying with the High Lord to be a source of reassurance for her, rather than for her own confidence with Tamlin. I made a note. Interesting that she chooses a creature that she met one time for like 5 minutes over this man that she's been falling in love with.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see very subconscious acts on Feyre's part that indicate her beginning to doubt Tamlin. For example, his mood when he gets upset about their conversation about his father and brothers. Feyre decides she can't paint, and it emphasizes both the fact that she's not herself right now, but also that she just doesn't feel safe.
It's such a crazy transition.
Yeah.
Like I love that. I love your call out. Oh, her lack of painting was lack of comfort.
Right, because safe Feyre paints.
Yeah.
The non-survivor Feyre paints.
Wait, the non-survivor Feyre paints? Survivor Feyre paints. Thriving Feyre paints.
Well, the Feyre we know who paints right now is the Feyre who feels like she doesn't have to hunt.
Yes.
And that she feels safe.
You're right. So right now she's exclusively separated the huntress in her or the survivor in her with the painter, which is interesting because in future books she does merge the two.
Right.
That's fair. Good point. Good point, Amy.
She's not there yet.
She's not there. So chapter 25. We are finally at Summer Solstice, and it is a hot night and a fun night. And Feyre is starting the chapter fully embracing her feminine. But she's gone one step beyond that, and she's now stepped into the childish, or at least identifying as childish. Alice put a bunch of flowers in her hair, and Feyre says, I must have felt childish with it on, but in the months I've been there, my sharp bones and skeletal form has filled out a woman's body. Good for you, Feyre. You've become that woman, you become that feminine, but now you've gone one point too far to be that kind of girlish figure, but that's what Tamlin wants.
It's all really about what Tamlin wants at this point. As she begins to fall for Tamlin, she assumes more of his identity, as we've seen previously. She wears dresses, she looks fey, she purrs. When Feyre comes down from getting dressed for Summer Solstice, Lucien describes her as positively fey. And once again, Tamlin only comments on her appearance in a positive way when he sees her in that dress. The last time was when she wore a dress for the first time to dinner.
I swear I felt like Rhysand in future books comments on her butt and pants like all the time.
Probably. What's sad is that by looking less like herself, or the Feyre we know, Tamlin falls more in love with her.
You know, there's parts of here that she's trying to hold on to herself. And at this point, this is a very interesting version of Feyre that we've never seen before and we will never see again, not even in future books. This Feyre does not come out to play. And the only time we see her getting a sense of self is when she's near food. And remember, we've already established that food is a source of power. So when she's by food, now she's starting to become a little bit more powerful. Quote here is, I lost Tamlin while waiting in line to fill a plate, leaving me trying my best not to look like I was some human plaything of his. But she's willing to release all of that power, like that little bit of power. She's just still willing to give it to him.
That's a great point. So Feyre goes from eating desserts and tarts to drinking fairy wine of her own volition, and Lucien tells her not to. And she thinks when she drinks the wine that she is liberated. She thinks to herself, today, just for today, I would indeed let my hair down. Today, let caution be damned. It was the most glorious thing I'd ever tasted. It liberated me from bonds I hadn't known existed. In actuality, she's just turned her power over to everyone else. She's not really a consenting party in anything that happens after this, and she's not even aware of the harm that she's putting herself in. Lucien has to save her from falling on rocks, and he's constantly chasing her. And later on, when she's dancing, it's described as someone grabs her and starts dancing with her. Like, she doesn't even know who that is.
Well, I mean, because it's not even regular drunk. It's fairy wine drunk. Like, there's a certain amount of possession element to it.
Yes, there is. And what's also not weird, but what's also disconcerting is the fact that time escapes her. And as a human, she already has so limited time. Like, that's really been emphasized throughout the book.
Oh, that's true. That's so sad.
And she's chosen to let some of that time go. What's also interesting to me is that while drunk on fairy wine, she is able to relate more to Fae and love them more than she's ever been before. And in doing that, she's also more like them. And let me read the quote.
I really love this quote.
On page 225, it reads, I watched the fairies dancing, circling the bonfire, not formal dancing. It was like they were as loose as I was, free. I loved them for it.
You know what's great?
My voice acting?
Yes. Please rate us 5 stars for Amy's voice acting. What I love about it, though, is that she talks about them being free. They're all in the middle of a blight. No one is free.
Yeah.
She's saying, like, they're as free as I am. I love them. We're amazing. We're all kumbaya. But they're not free. This is like a slight moment of escape. And that fairy wine, this energy, it makes her forget about the blight. And that's just been something that's been haunting her until this point.
I think it makes her easy prey for seduction.
Yeah.
Which we see immediately after this when Tamlin, like the Pied Piper, comes up with his fiddle and seduces her senses with music that she sees as a gift for her.
I'm not gonna lie though, when Sarah J. Maas like describes the forearms, like the sleeves rolled back,
yeah.
I'm just like, you know what? Sold.
Yeah.
Forearms?
Yes. Done. I have a friend who has made fun of me for a decade for my obsession with men's forearms, and she regularly sends me pictures of men's forearms of like, beautiful. Is this sexy? The quote in particular of Tamlin's seduction of Feyre on page 226 reads, "He grinned at me, and I didn't break my dancing as he rose from his seat and knelt before me in the grass, offering up a solo on his fiddle to me. Music just for me, a gift. He played on, his fingers fast and hard upon the strings of his fiddle. My body slithered like a snake. I tipped my head back to the heavens and let Tamlin's music fill all of me."
It's also really cringy. I can't, every time like I imagine it, one, playing the instrument for someone is just awkward. Yes. Two, he's kneeling in the grass in front of her. What about those grass stains?
That's not where my mind went. I imagine her with her head back slithering like a snake, and it's just not sexy.
You can guarantee that Feyre thought that she was the sexiest person there that night. She was probably like looking like a total idiot. Like she's probably in her mind like, I'm a goddess, I'm a snake. And in actuality, it's like she's just awkwardly gyrating by herself.
Oh, poor Feyre.
Tamlin keeps being this evil seductor. Like the Pied Piper, it was evil. They eventually, brought the children. And Feyre's childish.
That was not planned.
That wasn't planned. That was on the spot. So, just like he was Lucifer with Snake and, tempting her, like he's now the Pied Piper. And he is all sorts of seductor, but with zero follow through. Where is the actual follow through on this? Feyre will sleep with him. She would have slept with him chapters ago.
Oh, yeah.
Right after the fairy died in their arms. She'd be like, cool, let's go.
It's really interesting because just like with the curse, he's too in his head and won't do anything.
I just want to know why he didn't. Like, did he think he'd be taking advantage? Like, he doesn't want the curse broken.
Does he think he's too good for her? And that holds him back?
Oh, I bet he's one of those guys thinking that she's too good for him. Like, you're just so good for me and I'm not worthy of it. And no.
I don't know.
It's giving me real Edward Cullen vibes.
Yeah, kind of. Yet she submits to his Edward Cullen completely. There's one quote, and it drives me crazy when I read it. On page 228, it says, "I was as unburdened as a piece of dandelion fluff, and he was the wind that stirred me about the world." It's an awful image, first of all, but she has no control right now.
You've got to be drunk or high to be that kind of like, I'm a dandelion in the wind, and you're the wind, and we're just together floating in the wind. Like she's stoned and drunk.
Oh, yeah. Super stoned.
Now, normally we save breadcrumbs towards the end of the episode, but this is not a breadcrumb. This is a bread loaf, a loaf of bread, and a bread loaf. And we have to talk about it because Sarah J. Maas did a very smart thing here. This scene, this chapter, Feyre drunk on fairy wine, dancing in front of Tamlin, losing control, it is giving us major foreshadowing to when she's underneath the mountain, when she is drunk on fairy wine, dancing, Tamlin's there, but it's with much darker consequences and setting.
And we're going to see this a lot as we get to the Under the Mountain chapters, where there are things that have taken place in the Spring Court that are mirrored pretty much exactly Under the Mountain, which I didn't realize it the first time, but when I reread it and was processing it, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yep.
She knew what she was doing and she made very certain to hit certain points.
Yeah, I mean, with last episode talking about Tamlin with his paint covered body and now Feyre drunk on fairy wine, it really does mimic everything later on. Love it. Love it. Good job, Sarah.
So at the end of the chapter, after Feyre has non-consensually danced with a bunch of people, and
that's a great way of setting
and has followed Tamlin to who knows where to let him do who knows what, he kisses her. And this is really important because I think as readers, we've been waiting for these kisses, right? The first time you read this, you're like, yes, give me the kiss.
Kiss her.
And he kisses her several times. And it's really interesting to pay attention to the kisses because they intensify each time as Tamlin tests her boundaries. And I think this is the final frontier of taking over Feyre for Tamlin. He's already gained control of her in many ways, and so he's just got to make sure he can go about this the way he wants to. The quote in particular is, "His lips brushed mine, testing, soft and warm." And then, as he kissed me again harder, but nothing like the way he'd kissed my neck. And then, he laughed and kissed me fiercely.
It builds.
It builds. And within a very short amount of time, And I feel like this foreshadows their lovemaking.
Did you notice that before they started kissing, his lips are resting on her neck?
Oh, really?
So on page 228, when they're looking at the Will-o'-the-Wisps, Will-o'-the-Wisps, spirit, oh, that's him talking. Will-o'-the-Wisps, spirits of air and light, come to celebrate the solstice. They're beautiful. His lips grazed my neck as he murmured against my skin, dance with me, Feyre. When I read it the first time, I'm like, that's very intimate.
Yeah, that is really intimate. And it's really interesting that he does that. And then one page later, he kind of asks permission to kiss her. Because he's like,
I think I might kiss you.
I'm thinking I might kiss you.
Yeah.
Wait, but you've already violated my neck. Twice.
It's when I read that, I was like, I feel like that's more intimate than kissing.
Yeah, for sure.
Like that gentle murmur on someone's neck. Like that's like a very ticklish, ooh, right? And of course it's harkening back to when he kissed her neck or bit her neck. And yeah, you're right. Like he does that. And then he asks her, like he's definitely testing her boundaries.
Yeah.
And then kissing her on his terms when he's ready, because clearly they've already entered that emotional or at least physically intimate state.
It's almost a manipulation again in my mind. It's just like him revealing himself and then putting the glamour back on himself. He's giving her a taste of the intimacy by brushing his lips against her neck and then making her think it's her decision and it's consensual when he asks permission.
Because what is she right now? Drunk on fairy wine. And we've already established that drunk on fairy wine is way more intense than being drunk on human wine.
And being drunk in real life and fairy life
isn't a good moment to kiss someone.
Doesn't mean you can give consent.
Correct. I mean, does she want it? Yes. Is this the time to do it? No.
Nope.
So the chapter ends with Feyre being so happy. She experiences the happiest moment of her life, which is probably the happiest day of her life. So what does it take for Feyre to be happy? Ultimately, it's for her to realize it's okay to have hope. On page 230, she says, "My father once told me that I should let my sisters imagine a better life, a better world. And I told him that there was no such thing. I never understood because I couldn't believe that it was even possible until now." Yes, kissing Tamlin while drunk is a very happy moment. Dancing around is a happy moment. But it was that she realizes, oh, there is a way you can imagine a better world. So Feyre's now unlocked a new part of herself and a new part of the survivor that we've never seen before and that she's never had before. And she's now realizing to survive and thrive.
When I read this note that Jacqueline made, I got goosebumps because I'm a little bit ahead in my notes for the next episode. And this literally is called out by Feyre herself when she's in the human world. And let me read you the quote in particular on page 260. It reads, "I gazed again at the sad, dark house, the place that had been a prison. Elaine had said she missed it, and I wondered what she saw when she looked at the cottage. If she beheld not a prison, but a shelter. She had looked at that cottage with hope. I had looked at it with nothing but hatred, and I knew which one of us had been stronger." Like, this is a clear indication that Feyre's perception of the world has changed. And changed for the better, I think.
Like I was saying, this is now almost unlocks the huntress, the survivor in her. And in a weird way, I think it wakes her up so that in the upcoming chapters that we're about to discuss, we see that survivor and that fighter come back real fast. And it's funny, and that survivor, that fighter coming back and making a reappearance ends up being Tamlin's demise because she's way stronger than him. So full circle, it's funny that he is the cause of the survivor to come back by making her happy.
Yeah, that is interesting because she now has something to fight for. And I think on the surface level, she thinks, and I guess we'll talk about this in the future too, but I think she thinks she has Tamlin to fight for, but really what she has to fight for is the change she's experienced in herself.
Yep. It's beautiful.
So after the very fun or not fun, I don't know, depends on your perception.
We'll give it to her. It sounds like there wasn't a hangover.
Depends on your interpretation of the first paragraph of chapter 26.
Oh, because they all woke up at like afternoon and stuff. Yeah. That's fair. I think it's because she was like busy making out with Tamlin.
Fair.
Who do you think broke up that makeout session first?
Tamlin.
We can guarantee she tried to sleep with him on that field.
Oh, probably.
And Tamlin was like, "No, I must have you at your most vulnerable, even more vulnerable than now."
Don't worry, it will come soon. So as we move into chapter 26, we see Rhysand as High Lord of the Night Court for the first time. And when he makes his presence known in chapter 26, he is viewed with terror. But despite that, he and his actions are still described very erotically. Let me give you some examples. Rhysand approached Tamlin, each movement smooth as silk. His voice dropped into a whisper, an erotic caress of sound that brought heat to my cheeks.
So hot. I love it.
So hot. Rhysand laughed, a lover's laugh, low and soft and intimate.
He's so terrifyingly sexy. That's what she's saying. But Rhysand eventually becomes terrifying. Yes, like he definitely brings in the fear of God or the cauldron for Feyre towards the end. But initially, if you look at his terror, it's not really terrifying when he comes into the room. And this is when he doesn't know Feyre's there. So that's an interesting point to make. The moment he realizes that she's there, her terror changes. But initially, this is her perceiving him. He's terrorizing Tamlin, and it's not without his reason. We figure out why, because, Tamlin's the key to this curse. And in Rhys's mind, he's doing absolutely nothing to break the curse. And even though he never says in this book outright, oh, I hate Tamlin because he never tried, that's what we're seeing here. We see Rhys trying to bait him. He's bullying him, saying kind of rise up, man, do something. Do you notice how you're doing absolutely nothing? And in this moment, Feyre, the narrator, doesn't say anything about it, right? She's not saying damn, Rhys, that's a good point. She's in the corner, literally cowering. But in these moments, Tamlin says, there is nothing to be done about saving his lands, which is something that Feyre has continued to say she can help with, and it's something that he's continued to say, I've got this. So now, this is the first time that Feyre is hearing Tamlin saying, there's nothing to be done. The question then is, would Rhysand's terror be as frightening to Feyre if he wasn't saying these truths that terrify her to her bone and make her question Tamlin, ultimately?
Yeah, and I think it's a subconscious questioning, right?
Oh, yeah.
She's terrified of Rhysand because he's speaking truths that nobody in the room wants to accept.
Mm-hmm.
I think though Feyre is terrified of Rhysand, it's a misdirection of her terror, and it's terror or doubt of Tamlin as a protector. And when Rhysand realizes Feyre's in the room, as you said, Feyre's terror changes and her humanity or her weakness is brought back to light. When he attacks her mind, she thinks, had I retained any semblance of control over my body, I might have vomited. And then when he lets her go, she tried to keep from sobbing, from screaming, from emptying her stomach onto the floor. So she's physically and very visibly
terrified. Oh, yeah.
I keep saying terrified. I'm trying to think of a different word. Petrified. Excellent. But Tamlin is unable to fight. He only bows down to Rhys instead of trying to save Feyre.
Feyre's the only one who grabs a weapon. Mm-hmm. And this is before she even knows that Rhysand is the one who's about to walk through the door. All she sees is Tamlin and Lucien are freaking out. I'm going to make sure that I'm safe. I'm going to grab a knife. Like she doesn't even know what she's going to do with that knife, but she's like, I've got this. And again, we're seeing Feyre for the first time come back as the fighter, the huntress, the survivor.
Yeah, she's still in there, which is great.
Yeah. But this is also how, when we see just how useless Tamlin's claws are, or how useless his warriorness that I've been picking on this entire time. Like he's a very useless individual. And Tamlin says, leave, Rhysand. Tamlin commands, yet he didn't make a move to attack despite the claws, despite Rhysand still approaching. You can say that this is the beginning of the end for Feyre and Tamlin's love story, because this is when she starts to lose respect, or at least see him like that he's not her match, because she's ready to fight. She's ready to go. And everything that happens at the end of this book, what happens in the upcoming book, and her thoughts on him, her respect for him, you really can trace it back to this moment and what's about to happen.
So let me read this quote, because I think that's a really interesting point you raise. And I want to read this quote and then I want to re-examine it. On page 240, it reads, Tamlin pressed his forehead to the floor, his hands sliding along the floor toward Rhys's boots. I could have wept with rage at the sight of Tamlin being forced to bow to someone, at the sight of my High Lord being put so low. I think the desire to weep with rage is genuine, but I think the reason is not, because she has not admitted to herself yet the doubts that she has about Tamlin.
Yep.
I think she could have wept with rage because Tamlin bowed instead of fighting.
There's a different way that Sarah J. Maas could have written this in a way that's more sympathetic, more empathetic. Instead, there's a certain amount of disgust that Feyre has in this moment of, I can't believe he made Tamlin bow. As in, holy crap, Tamlin's bowed. He's not as strong.
He's not going to protect me.
He's not even going to try.
Yeah, which is really sad. And it's really sad for Feyre. And I think it breaks something in her. And, gentle reader, might I suggest that this foreshadows events under the mountain and how Tamlin does nothing when Amarantha is torturing Feyre with her trials.
Once a little bitch boy, always a little bitch boy.
Word.
Now that we are in the aftermath in chapter 27 of Rhysand's special visit, everyone is reeling from this. And Feyre wants to be there for Tamlin. She wants to do, the right girlfriend-ish friend zone. Like, talking. What are they? Like, we're talking. They're not quite girlfriend.
They haven't DTR'd yet.
Yeah, they're hanging out. She wants to be there for him, but instead he sends her away. But she says she was okay with it because she was trying to piece herself together again. She is having a hard time. Her mind was manipulated. She was the one whose life was being threatened in that moment. And yet Tamlin can only be concerned about his own anger, and he continues to put that emotional barrier between them. So she now thinks that you're weak, she's lost some respect, and now you won't even comfort her.
Yeah, instead Alice is the one comforting her with hot chocolate.
Always there with the hot chocolate.
Always there with the hot chocolate. That is the answer to life's problems. But it's interesting also that Feyre doesn't want to be comforted by Tamlin because she's scared of him. She avoids him at dinner, and his moods, once again, keep her from painting because she doesn't feel safe.
And eventually when Tamlin comes in to apologize to her, he says, I'm sorry, and Feyre says, it's fine, knowing that she's lying. She's not saying, I'm fine, we're fine. She says, it's fine. And that it encompasses everything. It encompasses what happened to her, his behavior, her own feelings. And she knows she's lying. So I'm sorry, it's fine. She's not accepting his apology.
And she's not accepting his actions. But it obviously goes over Tamlin's head. What I find the most sad in this moment, though, is that when she's told she's free and that she's going to go back to the human lands, she thinks she did something wrong.
Oh, it's so sad. That hurts my heart. Despite everything that's happened right before with Rhysand, knowing she's in danger, she takes on this guilt, and it's a guilt that like, oh no, I can't fix the blight. Tamlin doesn't do enough to ease her mind there.
No, he lets her take on that guilt, even though it's not hers to take. Because again, he's denied her at every turn when she's offered help. It's not her fault that he's turned her down. And why has he turned her down? Because he views her as something to be protected. I found it really humorous. I didn't notice it the first couple times I read the book. But he literally says to her, no, didn't you read between the lines today? We see here that he's admonishing her for not paying attention to the covert information that was given to her during the dialogue. And Lucian's going to do this again in the next chapter, which I think goes back to the idea you mentioned earlier, Jac. They get mad at her when they withhold information from her.
I get they can't say, hey, Feyre, there's a curse you got to break. But Alice tells her a lot of information, right? And she says there's parts that she can't say because like even now I can't bring, I physically can't tell you. So there's enough that they could tell her. They could say, shit's gone bad. You could help. Or, maybe you just let yourself feel. Or maybe Tamlin can try to like seduce, or not just seduce, but woo her a little bit more. Or at all.
Like, don't wait till the end to say I love you.
Oh my God. Well, can't wait till we talk about that in a bit.
Yeah. So let's talk about lovemaking on that note. It's really interesting to me that lies are bookending this lovemaking experience. So she's lied at the beginning of the chapter about saying it's fine. He lies to her, and she knows he's lying to her when he says she doesn't need to leave forever when she goes to the human world. And after their initial lovemaking session, she lies to him as well, saying she promises to keep her hands to herself when she asks him to stay.
This is setting up the worst dynamic between the two of them. The first time they have sex, they're both lying. She hasn't forgiven him. Maybe she doesn't realize that she needs to forgive him. And I think you were saying that, or you're about to say, like, every time they have sex, it gets worse.
Yeah, they use sex to forget the horror of what happened.
Forget the horror of Rhysand. Always coming in. Always coming.
Always there. And they do this again after Amarantha has died and technically Feyre has died and has been brought back. They have sex instead of talking about it. This is not a healthy relationship. This is not good.
We're now a relationship podcast. Guys, don't do this. Please don't.
Don't use sex to not have conversation.
I think it's safe to say that. But Feyre has had enough, and I just love she's the one who straddles him. So they come into this with a very interesting dynamic that she hasn't forgiven Tamlin. She recognizes now that Tamlin's weak, right? She's now like, okay, you're not willing to fight for me. So what does she do? She straddles him to start it off.
Yeah, and, I think this is definitely a sign of control because she was not in control of her body when Rhysand slipped his claws into her mind.
Mm-hmm.
She hasn't been in control for a while. So I also find it interesting that she chooses now to take control or try to. What's also interesting, this is their first lovemaking, and I think it should be a gentle act, and Tamlin tries to be gentle, but then he uses his claws to take off her panties. The quote is, "With one long claw, he shredded through silk and lace, and my undergarment fell away in pieces."
Silk and lace, she's really upgraded since the swim in the lake.
Oh, yeah, she has. She knew it was coming.
From that moment of the lake, she was probably like, I will only wear silk and lace.
Yes, I will only wear matching panties and bra, and it will only be silk and lace.
Every day, waiting. I love your note.
Oh, my note is dangerous.
Capitalize.
All caps.
Before you go into your other notes, Sarah J. Maas's Court of Thorns and Roses series is known as fairy porn, and everyone loves the smut. I forget how little this first book has compared to A Court of Silver Flames.
Oh, yeah.
When I read this, I'm like, what happened to my fairy porn? It's not here.
Yeah,
it's so tamed.
And when I first started reading this book, you made a really interesting point about sex and the level of detail. Do you remember that?
No, I'm sure I was brilliant, though. Tell me.
It was brilliant. So your point was the descriptions of sex become more explicit as Feyre engages with people that she's more emotionally and healthily emotionally attached to.
Whoa. Good job past me.
Good job.
It's true, though.
It's true. Like, the more love that exists in the relationship, the more descriptive the sex is.
And we connect to it just like Feyre connects to it.
Exactly.
Love it.
So in this lovemaking session, Feyre is prey again. Tamlin is described as having a ravenous, unyielding sort of hunger pass over his face. He let out a low growl and slowly, with predatory intent, you can fill in the blanks. His claws were out, but devastatingly gentle on my hips as he slid down between my thighs and feasted on me.
At least he did that.
You know what? I have to hand it to him. Good for him.
Good job.
But she is prey, he is predator. That's very clear.
After they go at it the first time, they sleep a little bit, they're about to go at it again. Feyre says on page 247, "We made love again, lazily and intently." In that moment, I had a huge light bulb moment, and I was just thinking, oh my goodness, Feyre keeps using lazy as a description for him. He has a lazy grin, a lazy smile, and now they lazily have sex. It's always been kind of considered a little charming, kind of disarming. And now it's just like, oh, actually, that is the most accurate description of Tamlin. He is lazy. He is lazy in all aspects of their relationship.
Right. Well, and he's lazy with the blight. Like, he's done nothing for 49 years.
Yeah.
What's interesting also about this lovemaking is that we see once again, Feyre is adopting Tamlin's persona when she claws at him. She tears at his clothes, she tears at his skin, she marks his back and his arms the way he marked her on Kellan Mai.
Brace yourself for my rant.
Let's open the floor to Jacqueline's rant.
Okay, so they're done, right? And he's just like, okay, cool. Thank you for all of this sex. By the way, you're leaving tomorrow morning. She wasn't prepared for him to leave, for her to have to leave tomorrow morning. And then on top of that, he was like, now I'm going to exit and not sleep the night. He was seriously going to double ghost her. Ghost after having sex and then ghosting her, saying, you can leave now. I get so angry at you just had sex and you were going to leave and she had to ask you to stay.
Yeah, it's just the ultimate, excuse my language, fuckboy.
Oh, it is a fuckboy. It's just the shittiest thing to do. You already wrecked her emotionally and you just have this beautiful night of passion, right? And now you've left her with clawed underwear, naked on a bed, and you're going to just leave.
So let's just now transition to how much men around Feyre suck. Because
suck so
not
hard.
only was Tamlin about to leave her, when Feyre is leaving and she wants to say goodbye to Lucien, he gets pissy with her and he admonishes her for not thinking through their clues enough.
He says, I thought you were smarter than this. I'm sorry that she wasn't smart enough to pick up none of the clues you guys were leaving her. The clues you left was, it's a blight. Oh no. There's nothing you can do about it. You kept telling her there's nothing she can do about it.
Right, exactly. It's just, again, they're getting mad at her because they withheld information.
So with her leaving and the blame of the curse not being broken, it now goes entirely to Feyre. These are sentiments that Feyre is going to carry with her into the human world. And even when Tamlin says goodbye and says that he loves her as she's leaving, like, what is she supposed to do with that? That was his one chance to save everyone, right? Is to say the I love yous. And she's supposed to say it back. But he's saying it to her as she's leaving. Like, why didn't you say it to her the night of solstice? After you guys have sex? There were so many moments you could have said that, and he's choosing this moment and making it difficult for her to ever have to reply like that. And somehow, again, it's her fault because she didn't say I love you back.
He does say it to her after sex when she's falling asleep.
Oh, I forgot about that.
And she thinks she dreamed it. That's his fault. It's like a child speaking to a sleeping parent.
It doesn't count.
Stupid.
It does not count.
It doesn't count.
On page 251, she says, I should say it. I should say those words, but they got stuck because beneath it all, he was immortal and I would grow old and die. I would not become a burden to him. Feyre is going back to the human world, and we have to remember the last time she said goodbye to people that she loved was when she said goodbye to her family. And think about the dynamics she had there. Like, no one told each other that they loved each other. It was very toxic. It's not a great environment. And Feyre doesn't know how to love or express love. In that moment, she's about to go to her family, so of course she's going to fall back into old patterns of not feeling comfortable enough to express anything. But yes, Tamlin, go ahead and choose that moment to tell her you love her.
Like you said, it's mirroring her departure from her family. Like, they didn't tell her they loved her. And so she's never had to interact this way with another human being or another being.
Yeah. When was the last time anyone told her they loved her?
Right, exactly. Like, what is she supposed to do with that? So, of course, she thinks of herself as a burden in that instance. And then he forces her to go to sleep.
What was the point of that?
So she can't figure out how to get back.
Dick move. I don't know. It was just, that's so unnecessary.
Yeah, it just makes her eventually coming to save them all the more difficult.
Yeah.
But when she's back with the humans, Feyre awakes to find herself at her family's new estate with human servants. And one of the first things Feyre notices is that the human servants are subpar when compared to Feyre's servants. To me, this suggests that she, in her mind, is already transitioning to high fae. Like, she's already thinking like a high fae.
I love that her mind has chosen to transition to high fae rather than like Alice or something. Like, she's like, well, if I'm going to become something else, it's going to be high fae or nothing. Like, in her mind, mentally. Like, she went from starving, hunting person to mentally, nope, high fae now.
High fae, I know. I mean, maybe that's me interpreting.
No, you're right. We're not. I mean, she talked about the food being bland. She talked about everything being dull. And imagine Feyre at the beginning of the book saying food was bland.
Oh yeah, that was nothing. She would never call food bland.
It's an insult.
Yeah. So this is how she describes the servants. The other servants were human too. All of them restless, not at all like the utter stillness with which the high fae held themselves. Unfinished, graceless creatures of earth and blood.
Oh my God.
Like, she's
That's
brutal.
So harsh when you say that. Unfinished, graceless creatures of earth and blood. Fuck, Feyre. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's really harsh.
Is that the meanest thing Feyre's ever said? I mean,
maybe at this point.
At the one point, she does in her mind say Amarantha's not that hot.
Oh yeah, that's true. That hasn't happened yet.
It's a harsh reminder of like, oh, everything I've been fighting for is this? This is what I've been fighting for? These people?
Yeah.
These graceless, unfinished peasants are who I've been fighting for? Ew. Not into it. But she's now back with her family. And, you know, it happens with everyone. When you go back to your family, you fall into old dynamics. She wants to fall back into the dynamic of being the protector, the person who's responsible. But there's nothing to be responsible for. There's tons of money. People are happy living their life. So what does she do? She feels like she needs to be responsible for the world. So as I wrote here, totally chill, Feyre. The quote is on page 254. I couldn't fight the sensation that I made a very, very big mistake in leaving, no matter Tamlin's orders. That's not your problem. Like, you don't have to take on the entire, like, she saves the world. Like, I know she saves Prythian in the human world, but like, they would have taken over everywhere else.
So one last note to wrap up chapter 28 is Nesta. And Nesta, love her or hate her, I love her. But she is on the level of Faye. And she is set apart from the rest of the humans like Feyre and in Feyre's mind. Feyre remarks, I'd forgotten how cunning her eyes were, how cold. She'd been made differently, from something harder and stronger than bone and blood. She was as different from the humans around us as I had become. Dun dun dun.
Sarah J. Maas knew exactly what she was doing.
Oh
with
yeah,
that.
she knew exactly where Nesta was headed, and I love it.
Oh, the smut we get from her.
So speaking of knowing where things are going, let's talk some breadcrumbs.
Such a good transition.
Oh, thanks. So to start with, Feyre Cursebreaker, on page 239, Rhysand comments to Tamlin, if it's any consolation, she would have been the one for you, and you might have gotten away with it. A bit late, though. She's more stubborn than you are. I love this because it's so layered. Feyre obviously does not know what's going on, and I almost missed this quote, but Rhysand is saying, Feyre would have helped you break the curse.
Yeah.
But you're too lazy to get it done, and she's stubborn, and you've lost time.
There was still days, right? Like,
Yeah.
Rhysand gave him the biggest clue of, dude, you can do this.
Yep.
Just put in effort tonight. Just,
Just make it happen.
make it happen. I don't care. Like, Tamlin could have come to her that night and been like, I'm so sorry. I just want to take care of you. I love you. And then she'd be like, oh my God, Tamlin. The next breadcrumb, Feyre's death. So Feyre thinks Tamlin will break her heart, but in fact, she will die because of her love for Tamlin. The quote, I knew I was headed down a path that would likely end my mortal heart, being left in pieces. Yeah, your heart will be left in pieces.
Yeah, not her heart, her mortal heart.
Her mortal heart. Oh.
Because it will become immortal.
Dun, dun, dun. And then in A Court of Mist and Fury, we get a little teaser there. Feyre tells Tamlin he didn't make her feel like a prisoner, but he will in the future. On page 229, you never made me feel like a prisoner, never made me feel like a little more than cattle. You're going to feel worse soon.
I'm going to give a quick summary of how all the seduction attempts in these chapters give clues back to Rhysand. Lucian makes fun of Feyre about her bargain with Tamlin and says, if I offer you the moon on a string, will you give me a kiss? When she's out drinking fairy wine during summer solstice, she has an affinity for starlight. She feels stars twinkling between her fingers. And then when Tamlin enters Feyre's bedroom right before their lovemaking, Feyre sees moonlight glimmering on gold.
There is never a moment without Rhys.
Nope, Rhys is always there.
Speaking of Rhys always being there, on page 224, Rhysand mentions the decapitated heads that he left at Tamlin's doors. And he talks about how it should remind him of the good old days. Personally, I believe this is a breadcrumb talking about how Tamlin killed his parents and how Rhys then went and killed his family. Oh, Tamlin didn't kill Rhysand's parents, just his mother and his sister. But, still horrible.
So let's go back to the questions at the start of the episode.
All right, the first question was talking about what Feyre does with the information, how does she process it, and ultimately, a lot of picking and choosing what she does with the information that comes to her. Granted, she only picks and chooses when she's at her loosest, happiest, not caring at all. But once she starts to go back into survivor mode, she starts to put the bits of information together and process it the way she should, like a boss.
Because she was a boss when she was a hunter. And when she was happiest, she was the most complacent and therefore did not want to see, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Our second question was about, Feyre's growth. Can we really say she has grown when she's most unlike herself? And I would say yes. I think that she had to get to this point where she was most unlike herself, where she felt most safe, because it allowed her perception of the world, of herself, to change. And this idea of thriving is what she ends up fighting for. And I don't think you would get to the events of Under the Mountain without her having had this experience of I was able to experience happiness, I was able to have joy, and I want to fight for that now.
Before we started recording, we were talking about this, and we were saying that the climax of the book hasn't happened yet, but the climax of her development has. And this particular buildup has been building from going from that starving survivor to who this new Feyre is, who's discovering that, wow, maybe there is such thing as thriving. And, she's going to grow and continue, but, there's a hell of a plummet that's going to come there. But developmentally, this is a climax for her.
right, and that wraps up this week's episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Book Talk for Book Talk. We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform. Next week, we will be exploring chapters 29 through 32 of A Court of Thorns and Roses.
We would love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. You can submit your comments to our form at booktalkforbooktalk.com for a chance to have your feedback discussed during a weekly mini episode.
If you are enjoying the podcast, please visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and learn about supporting the show through Patreon, Ko-Fi, or Venmo.
Or find us on TikTok and Instagram at the handle Book Talk for Book Talk. Bye.